This is a video essay about the 1967 Jean-Luc Godard film, Two or Three Things I Know About Her, which I first saw in 2012. For most of this video, I'm just going to call the film Two or Three Things, and I'm not even going to try to say it in French. On y va. When I first saw Two or Three Things, I was convalescing. I'd slipped a disc in my vertebrae, and I can only describe the pain as incandescent. You burn bright, like a flame, but the flame doesn't go out, it just keeps burning. Minutes become hours, hours become days, days become weeks. You keep burning. Moving is the enemy, but also necessary. And it was in this condition, and with these observations about pain, that I met this film. I watched film after film after film. One of them was Lovely Molly, which, you know, amazing. But after watching Lovely Molly, I wanted something different. I tried rewatching Tarkovsky's Sacrifice for the umpteenth time, but it still didn't vibe with me. So I found Two or Three Things. And it was about 3 minutes into the film when I realized that this was not only something very special, but also, and without question, the most beautiful Godard film I had ever seen. Godard, the owner of the jump cut, the enfant terrible, the Marxist, one-time husband of Anna Karenina, and finally, the old man of cinema, now dead. Maybe people shouldn't attach so much baggage to a name, which is, after all, just a word. Godard was, like most of us, never really just one thing, although obviously he was one person, but he managed to be several different people throughout his life. So it might be useful to know which Godard we're talking about when we talk about Two or Three Things. Let's break him down into 4 key chronological phases, and I know I'm oversimplifying and being reductive, but hey, that's the point. So you've got stage 1, which is right at the beginning, and it's fun, it's fast moving, sometimes black and white, sometimes colourful and flip and cool and hip, and people are dancing and whatnot. Most of the time when people talk about Godard, they're talking about phase 1. Then you've got phase 2 from 1968 onwards, because something happened in May 1968 that changed him forever, and this is what you might call the Marxist phase. It's the Ziga-Vertov group phase. It's seen as the spiky bitey, not really all that much fun anymore phase. But I don't know, I have a lot of time for tout va bien and British sounds. Then you've got phase 3, what I'm going to broadly classify as the 80s. It's the return of storytelling, kind of, a bit, but it's also the no more moving the camera around phase. A lot of filmmakers start moving the camera less and less and less as they get older, and Godard was no different. Now you might disagree with this, but I think that most of the time when people talk about Godard, they're not even thinking about phase 3. No one really talks about it much. Remember Hail Mary? Remember Detective? Remember King Lear? Right? Who the hell does? Although, remember when this guy strengthened his CV/resume by pretending that he had played a small role in Godard's King Lear because he knew no one would check? Anyway, and then you've got phase 4, which broadly speaking kind of starts with the TV series Histoires du Cinema and carries on with that same essayistic style that Histoires had. A lot of people identify this phase as the phase when Godard really gave up on trying to entertain an audience. But, like I say, I'm not sure to what extent he was ever really trying to entertain people. Not that I'm saying I don't like his films, I do. I just think that throughout his entire career, throughout all his cinematic phases, he's never really trying to be your friend, which I can respect. Anyway, let's jump back in time a little because we have to talk about 1968 quickly. In May 1968, Paris burned. France burned. You had student groups and worker groups uniting and uprising and taking to the streets and smashing everything all to hell. If you were French at the time, this was seismic. It was like the Kennedy assassination. Where were you in May 1968? What music was playing on the radio in May 1968? What clothes were you wearing in May 1968? After May 68, Godard was never really the same again. His whole outlook on life changed, and sure, he was pretty spiky before any of this happened anyway, but afterwards he was super spiky, super antagonistic, derailed the Cannes Film Festival in 68, assassinated his friendship with his best buddy and brother in cinema, Francois Truffaut, with a takedown of his film Day for Night, and so on and so forth. And where does Two or Three Things come in this series of phases? It's towards the end of phase 1, when Godard was starting to think he'd said everything in cinema that he wanted to say or could say, but it was made before the riots of May 68, so it is, IMO, a lot more fun and flip than it might have been if he decided to make this in or after 68. Fun side note, when he made this film, he actually made 2 films at the same time. He shot Two or Three Things in the first half of the day, and then in the second half of the day, he shot Made in USA. Same crew, different cast. You might think the 2 films would be much more similar than they are. They're very different. With Two or Three Things, Godard knew he was doing something new and different that interested him. He wanted to include everything in the film. Sport, politics, groceries, Vietnam, your problems with your partner, everything. He felt that newspapers, which people read on a daily basis, releases were just as eclectic and scattershot and all-encompassing, and no one had a problem with them, so why would anyone have a problem with Two or Three Things? Well, perhaps because deep down he knew he was doing something unusual. Writing about the film in May '67, he saw himself as making a film which was like a sociological essay in novel form, written using only musical notation. He summarized his thoughts on Two or Three Things by saying, "Is this cinema? Am I right to go on trying?" And I don't know, what do you think? Is this cinema? Anyway, let's jump back to that thought I had early on that this is, without doubt, the most beautiful Godard film ever, IMO. Raoul Coutard, that's the DP here, and he's the reason the film looks the way it does. He's the key visual figure in both Godard and Truffaut's early films. He did this, and 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 this. But although all of that is amazing, he's never done anything that is, for me, better looking than this film. And what are these weird compositions about? What is he playing at here? Raoul Coutard knows where an eye line should go. He knows about the golden mean, or if you prefer the rule of thirds. Then what's he up to? Willfully disregarding this rule. Why? Does anyone care? Oh, and by this point, you may be asking yourself, what the hell is this film, Two or Three Things I Know About Her? So, Two or Three Things is not a film or story in the traditional sense, but it also is. On the one hand, it's a story about a lady called Juliet, played by actress Marina Vladi, who is encountering the financial problems caused by living in Paris and needing more and more money and the things you end up doing in order to get that money. We see Juliet, Juliet's husband, Juliet's child, Juliet's friends, Juliet's problems, Juliet's belongings, Juliet at home, Juliet out in the world, etc, etc, etc. All the things you'd expect to see in this kind of story, but perhaps not in the order you would expect or the way you would expect. But on the other hand, it's a film about the actress Marina Vladi, who is playing a character called Juliet in a film by Jean-Luc Godard, and what happens if we look at her like this, or like this, or like this? What happens if we film her walking down a street and then do it again and again? Godard became famous for saying all you need to make a film is a girl and a gun. But in Two or Three Things, it's more like all you need to make a film is a girl. And it's interesting that he went with Marina Vladi, because by this point, Godard was known for using the same faces over and over and over again. But Marina Vladi was not only new to him, the two would never work again. So what is it that Marina Vladi is capable of showing or being that the usual faces couldn't do, and why she had to be in this film? I don't know. And in the tradition of Two or Three Things, I'm not even going to posit an answer. I'm just going to put it out into the world and let it hang there. What I will say is that it's a film about the objective and the subjective experience. What is our relationship with the character Juliet? Is this a subjective experience where we feel the difficulty of someone's situation and lot in life? Or is this an objectifying situation where we simply look at people like objects, like things, but we remain separated from them as though a sheet of glass were between us? And who are these people we keep looking at? Who is this person when we look at her in this image here, or here, or here? Is this Juliet, or is it Marina Vladi? What is the difference between the image of this woman in the world and the image of this woman in a magazine? Does it matter whether you look at it from this perspective or this perspective? Where is the truth in all of this? At the same time, it's also a film where Godard gets to explore his film as language, all of its own thoughts. He spent his whole career thinking about cinema as language, about words as language, about the limitations of those words, about your vocabulary creating limits for your experience of the world and of your own existence. For example, Juliet visits her husband. He's at work in a garage. How can you describe this? What words do you use? What do you choose to focus on? What do you choose to omit? Why is it that the words you choose can only describe so much, but in the image there is so much more? There's so many incidental things that it would never occur to anyone to notice. The foliage, the signs, all of the other people in the background who are not the focus of this moment. What, if any, limitations does cinema have as language? And it's not all dense language stuff. There are some simple ideas here. Godard's reasons to live happily. What is memory? It is holding onto a moment as it passes, to savor it, to remember it. We've chosen a moment and held on to a reason to live as it flies by. In 1979, 800 years ago, I went to this event. I was very young. It was me and my mother and all these people. This is a moment that I have held on to. I can remember this event with crystal clarity. One of my reasons to keep living. I've held on to so many, but this is one that I can actually show you. This was before either of my brothers had been born. It was just me and my mother, just the two of us. Perhaps this is my mother, right here. Perhaps. It could be. But whether it is or it isn't really the point. We were there. I remember it. Thanks to cameras, I can show you. Because what are cameras and what is cinema other than the ability to choose a moment, to catch it as it passes by, to hold it, to remember it, to imbue a moment with meaning, and to share it with others. Anyway, what was I using an inert set of symbols to explain? Oh, that's right, 2 or 3 things I know about her. So there are a number of women in the film, like seriously, a lot, and we should talk about this. Time and time again, we see them first as an object, unspeaking, nothing but the image, and then they talk.
Un nouveau langage devrait être. Je me suis levée à 8 heures. J'ai les yeux marron-vert.
Godard himself described it as being similar to filming the outside of a house and then the inside. When they talk, it's almost as though they become an actual person to us with thoughts and opinions and preferences and a life that we may not have immediately ascribed to them. The woman who notices the new shoes, the woman who likes cycling, and this woman. Actress, writer, director Juliette Berthoud. This was the first film she was ever in. The Berthoud scene is interesting because a lot of the scenes with the women are passive or incidental, but this moment is uncomfortable, at least it is for me. And it features Juliette's husband, which I missed the first time I saw this, and it goes on and on and on, but in a good way. It's a lot more confrontational than the other scenes in the film. Berthoud pushes back. She refuses to play any kind of game. She stands up for herself. The very next scene features this lady, and she's much more passive, much more naive, letting this older man steer the conversation, but getting as little out of the exchange as Berthoud does. And when we see these women talking, what are we seeing? Is this Godard talking? Is this him assuming a number of different characterizations? Or is he building fiction? Or a third possibility, perhaps these lines being spoken were created with the actresses we're seeing. Perhaps they chose what it was they would say. Perhaps these words, in some way or another, reflect the Marina Vladi of their existence, their real selves, their real names.
Je n'ai pas de projet d'avenir, car l'horizon est fermé.
Perhaps Juliette Berthoud chose to make her scene so confrontational, to make herself so vulnerable and unsure of herself while also being completely sure of herself and sharp as a knife. Maybe. And you might be saying here, so wait, 2 or 3 things I know about her? Is this the her of the title? Is this her? Or is this her? Or is this her? And no, it's none of these women, because the her of the title is the city of Paris. Godard was reading the paper one day and chanced upon an article about Paul de Louvrier being appointed prefect of the Paris region by the French government and his subsequent focus on the new suburbs around the city. Cram people into new blocks around the edges. Build, build, build. People sometimes talk about how 2 or 3 Things is a film about prostitution or sex work because that's the world that Juliette and several other characters in the film are forced into by the high cost of living in Paris. But it's not about this at all, or rather, not really. It's a film about what it costs to live in an ever more expensive city, sure, a place where building and progress never end, where the future is more present than the present. But what Godard wanted people to understand was that whatever means you pursue to continue living in an ever more expensive place is, to Godard, a version of selling yourself to others for a price, no matter what you do. Ouch. And Godard wasn't the only person who'd noticed what was happening to Paris. Remember Mon Oncle, how Tati, played Monsieur Hulot, lived in and was part of a community that seemed much older, much more traditional, and how his sister and her husband lived in modernity, and how worried they were about appearances, and how little they seemed to enjoy life, but the whole thing was really fun. Remember the workmen Hulot passes from time to time, the broken walls, and how it might be that this is slowly being erased. Remember how Tati came back 9 years later with Playtime, and this time we're in Paul de Louvrier's Paris the whole time, and everything is sleek and modern and everything is a farce. Recently I've been in a part of London called White City quite a lot. And when I was younger, that part of London looked like this, but now it looks like this. Paris is shaped like this, like a snail, with areas or boroughs called arrondissements going around and around. London looks like this, structured into zones, with zone 1, where I'm from, in the centre. Zone 2 is a ring around that, and so on and so forth. White City is in zone 2, and the White City development I've been showing you is the work of a company called White City Living. It looks like this. It is for people like this. A fun little side note here is that in London, at the moment, schools in zones 1 and 2 are shrinking or merging or closing because there just aren't enough families and children in London at the moment. How on earth could this have happened? I'm not glib enough to say that this happened because this happened. I know it's a lot more complicated than that, but it's interesting, no? Anyway, Two or Three Things. Godard, he made this film because he loves Paris. And he not only loves Paris, but he also loves France. You think it's happenstance that the colour palette in this moment is blue, white and red, like Marina Vladi or Juliet is Marianne of France wrapped in the flag? You think it's a coincidence that the flag is again here, covered in scraps of pop culture, a landscape of modernity as the new French flag, written across the centre, on sale here? I hadn't seen anything so bitey, but at the same time so patriotic as when I saw Gaspar Noé's first film, Sol Contra 2, in the year 2000. Remember how that film started? Like this. Two or Three Things talks so much about the rebuilding of the Paris suburbs that it also might be interesting to put it next to Matthew Kassavitz's 1995 film, La Haine. The suburbs of Paris have grown up and had their children now, Vince, Hubert, Saïd. The old town remains the same, well, kind of the same, a few adjustments here and there, like turning the word yours into the word ours. But let's end with the eye of the duck of the film. This is the Godard film that includes the cup of coffee scene, and it's hard to explain just how huge and monumental this scene is. It's just a person looking at another person, the hubbub of a cafe, and then a single cup of coffee, with Godard's voice talking over everything, as it does throughout the entire film.
Le monde seul, aujourd'hui où les révolutions sont impossibles, où des guerres sanglantes me menacent, où le capitalisme n'est plus très sûr de ses droits et la classe ouvrière en recul, où le progrès, où les progrès foudroyants de la science donnent au siècle futur une présence obsédante, où l'avenir est plus présent que le présent, où les lointaines galaxies sont à ma porte, mon semblable, mon frère.
It's that cinematic link to the lesson Tom Rolfe learned while working as an editor on Taxi Driver. One object as everything, one object as a representation of the universe that we live in. All of our lives, all of our hopes and fears existing deep within that coffee and fizzing away on the surface. It's a film about being in the world and noticing things and looking at them and thinking about what you're looking at and thinking about how other people look at you and what they might think and asking yourself whether that matters. It's a film about language and pictures and what it takes to live in a city. It's a film about caring and being interested. All of this was what ran through my mind while I burned with pain and watched this film. But I don't know. Is this a video essay? Am I right to go on trying?
Tiens, vous avez des nouvelles chaussures. Je vis dans les grands bâtiments près de l'autoroute du Sud. Je viens à Paris 2 fois par mois. Vous savez, les grands bâtiments bleus et blancs. Un paquet de Winston et des allumettes.